Hello folks, welcome back to the Edupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. So today again we'll continue with the topic, the Competition Act 2002. Right? So we have already had around 2 lectures for this chapter. Right? So in the first lecture we discussed about the introduction, about the background of the Competition Act. So basically in that lecture we discussed about the MRTP Act. What is MRTP Act? It is the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. So that was basically the origin of Competition Act. It was known as the MRTP Act, and then it went under so many amendments, and finally in 2002 you had the Competition Act in force. Right? And we discussed the basic objective and how the MRTP Act met its objective. Right? So we'll just revise the objectives. It was the prevention of concentration of economic powers. Number 2, prohibition on the monopolistic trade practice. Number 3, prohibition on the restrictive trade practice. Number 3, prohibition on the unfair trade practice. Right? And we had seen how the MRTP Act went ahead to fulfill its objectives. Right? Then in the next lecture we moved on to the definitions, and as you know, the definitions in this chapter is very important. Right? So we had covered around 4 to 5 definitions, right? And we left the other 5 definitions to be discussed in this lecture. So the definition that we have already covered is the definition of acquisition, agreement, cartel and consumer. Yes, these 4 definitions took the entire lecture, right? And that was needed because before your examinations, right, you have a lot of things to study. For some, most of the students it is 8 subjects, for some it is, for most it is 4 and for some it is 8 subjects. So when you're bombarding all the 8 subjects on your brain or all the 4 subjects on your brain day after day, remembering or memorizing definitions, the entire big statements become really difficult. Or the first go, when you memorize it, you think, okay, I know it. Open it up 5 days hence, it will be blank, as if you haven't read it ever. So if you try mugging up definitions, you will never be able to write it out in your examination unless and until you have mugged it up again an hour before your examination, and you don't have time for that. So basically what we need to do is we need to understand, we need to break the definitions in pieces and understand the crux, understand what it is, and each word, each phrase in the definition needs to be paid attention, needs to be analyzed, so that you don't make a mistake in the examination. You don't get confused in the examination with the words, the tenses, the past, present, future. Right? So we gave in a time, and I hope that was useful for you. Now you are clear with the definition of acquisition, agreement, cartel and consumer. Right? So if we give a brief review about these 4 definitions within 2-3 minutes. So what was acquisition? So acquisition was where you directly or indirectly acquire or agree to acquire the shares or the voting power or the assets or the control over the management or the control over the enterprise. That was acquisition. Right? When we talked about agreement, right, then we basically what we saw is that agreement need not be formal. It can be informal. It need not be in writing. It can be oral. It need not be enforceable by law, by legal proceeding. It can be otherwise. Right? That was the basic crux of agreement under the Competition Act. And basically agreement is what it is. It is the arrangement, understanding or an action in concert. Right? Then we saw the definition of cartel. So this is one word that would be new for most of you. Right? But some of you must have already heard it in your economics or other subjects. Cartel. Right? But for others it may be new. So what is basically cartel? It is association of people. Right? There are few people coming together, forming a group, forming an association, and then deciding and then moving ahead with the next course of action. That is a cartel. So as per the Competition Act, what we saw is that the people, there is association of basically 5 categories of people. That is the producers, the sellers, the distributors, the traders and the service providers. And why do they form a cartel? They form a cartel to limit, control or attempt to control. What? A distributor would control distribution, a trader would control trading, service provider would control service provider, seller would control selling, these things. So an association of these 5 categories attempting to control the 5 jobs that they do, the 5 course of action that they take, right? So that is a cartel. So you need to understand that we are only talking about the 5 categories, right? Then we had the consumer, the definition that actually blows the mind when you read it for the first time. But when you break it up, when you understand, when you analyze, it is nothing. It is a very simple definition, right? So after breaking up, you have very few points remaining. That the consumer is obviously a person, right? So person who buys goods or who avails services, first point. Second, there has to be a consideration. And we know that we'll use this word consideration 4 times in the definition, and then whenever we use the word consideration, we will follow its payment mode. That either it is paid or it is promised to be paid, or partly paid or partly promised, or subject to the system of deferred payment. That is the consideration. Third thing that we need to keep in mind is that the buyer need not be the only consumer. Even if there is some other user, like if your dad gets a mobile phone and you use it, and even you are a consumer if you are using that product with the approval of your dad, right? And what is the purpose of your use? Either you're using it to resale, or you're using it for commercial purpose, or you're using it for personal purpose. All of it is covered, right? So this is what you need to understand. I will not read the definition again today. It will take a lot of time. It has already taken a lot of time in the previous lecture, right? So I hope the definition of acquisition, agreement, cartel and consumer is clear, and the definition of agreement, cartel and consumer has been asked in your examinations. Agreement has been asked around 4 to 5 times. Even in your practice manual, if you see, you will have 4 to 5 references to this definition. There are 4 to 5 places where you have been asked a definition of agreement, to be very specific. Because obviously whenever you get a question that agreement is not enforceable by law, or it is oral agreement, if you haven't gone through the definition, the first thing that the student will say is that it will not be considered. Because basically you know that an agreement should be enforceable by law. It has to be a written document, right? So this definition of agreement as per the Competition Act is deviating from the general cognate sense of agreement. Hence that is one place where the examiner tests you, because the people who do not cover it will definitely get it wrong, but who have gone through the agreement, definition, who have understood it, will definitely get it right now, right? So if you have seen the previous lecture, I bet you will get it right in your examination. So we'll move on to the next definition. There are 2 main definitions again remaining, that is the enterprise and the goods, and then 4 simple definitions that are not very important, but still I would prefer you understand those definitions, right? And if time permits, I will read out the other definitions as well that we have in our course. Now again, the definition of enterprise, again, if you look at it on the first go, it will be very complicated, same as consumer. That is one reason why I didn't take up this definition in the previous lecture, in the previous class, because 2 definitions, consumer and enterprise, looking at it, reading it bare from the text would be a little difficult for you, right? And it would be difficult for you to seep in, oh my god, such a big definition, how do we write it in the examination? No, it is nothing such, right? At the end of the definition, I hope consumer is an easy definition for you now. Similarly, enterprise will also be an easy definition for you at the end, right? So first again, I will read the text so that you understand how complicated the definition seems it is, right? So enterprise means a person or a department of government who or which is or has been engaged in any activity resulting to production, storage, supply, distribution, acquisition or control of article or good, or provision of service of any kind, or in investment, or in the business of acquiring, holding, underwriting or dealing with shares, debentures or other securities, or any other body corporate, either directly or through one or more of its units or division or subsidiary, whether such unit or division or subsidiary is located at the same place where the enterprise is located or at a different place, right? But does not include any activity of the government relatable to the sovereign function of the government, including all activities carried out by the department of government dealing with atomic energy, currency, defense and space. Whew. A heavy definition, right? But again, if you analyze it, there is nothing difficult in it. Just break it down into parts and analyze it. So the first thing is that an enterprise means a person or a department of government. Now what do you mean by a person? A person, over here they are not using the word individual. So please keep it out of your mind that the person is any person, an individual. He is not a man, he is not a human being. Not compulsorily a human being. Person, again, we have the next definition. If we move ahead, the definition number 7 that we'll be covering is the definition of person. Right? And even in your taxation, in your IPCC 2, you must have covered the definition of person. It's individual, HUF, company, firm, AOP, BOI stuff, right? So we'll cover the definition of function as per the Contract Act as well. So that is the entire genre of person that it is talking about. So enterprise means any of those person or even a department of government. Why has the department of government mentioned separately? Because it is not included in the definition of person. Right? Now they're talking about these person or department of government who is, that means who is presently, currently in the present situation or has been engaged in the past. So in the definition of consumer, right? In the definition of acquisition, we talked about acquiring or agreeing to acquire. That is the present and the future tense. But over here we're talking about the present and the past tense. He has been engaged, right, in any activity. If there is an enterprise, right, they would do something. In general term, in layman term, if you talk about an enterprise of an entity, they work out, right? They have some task. They are either a manufacturing unit or service providing unit or something. All the enterprise, they are that way. So if you go by the definition of enterprise in the Competition Act, it is again a person or department of government, first thing, right? But it does not include all the person or department of government, right? It says only those person or department of government who are, like, who is or has been engaged in any activity, right? Now what are the activities? So there are certain activities that have been defined. Activities like production, then after production what you do is storage, then you supply it in the market, it is supply, then distribution, and then acquisition or control of article or good. So if you try to learn it, then the production, who is the producer? The first entity, right? If you talk about the life cycle of a product, the first entity who is manufacturing it is the producer. Then what does the producer do? After manufacturing, they will store it in their warehouse, and then as per the demand they'll give it out in the market, then they'll sell it, right? Then what will they do? They will supply it into the market, and then it will come down to a distributor who will do the distribution process in the entire market now, right? And then the retailers will acquire it or control the article or good, right? Or the provision of service of any kind, right? So they're talking about goods and services both. Like in the case of consumer also we talked about goods and services both. Over here also we're talking about goods and services both, right? But here we are moving ahead. It is not only about goods and services, it is also about investment. It is also about the business of acquiring, holding, underwriting or dealing with shares or debentures. That means a business whereby you deal with the shares or debentures, you deal with the securities of a business, right? And this they're saying either they do it directly by themselves or they make the activity done by any division or its subsidiaries. And whether the division or subsidiary is in the same location or in some different location. Obviously you know that divisions can be in some other city, some other town, some other state, some other country, right? So it is talking about the division or subsidiary, and then it says whether it is in the same location or it is in some other location, a different place, right? But it does not include any activity of government relatable to sovereign function. Now there are two types of function of the government. One is the sovereign function and the other is the non-sovereign function. The sovereign function basically are those functions that the government provide free of cost, right? So those functions will not be included. So if there is a government department, right, that is engaged in cleaning of your society, or for example they are India Post, there are certain services of India Post that is free of cost, so those functions will not be included. But otherwise the other non-sovereign function where they charge money from you, those will be covered over here as an enterprise. So those government entities would be considered to be enterprises, right? And then they have given the example of sovereign functions as well. So the sovereign function would include atomic energy, currency, defense, space. So the government entities which are involved in these things will be considered to be the sovereign functions, and hence it will not be included, right? So now what is the definition of enterprise? It is either a person or a department of government. First point. Second point is either they are currently or they have been engaged in any activity. That is the second point, right? Now the activity has been defined: life cycle of a product, production, storage, supply, distribution, right? And then finally there will be acquisition or control of the article or good, or provision of service. So product life cycle is over, then you include services, then you include investment, right? And then you also include certain other business, like that is dealing in securities, acquiring, underwriting, dealing in securities, shares, debentures, those things. So even that aspect is included, right? And then it says that it can be done either by themselves or through any division or subsidiary, and the location can be any, at the same location or at a different location, right? And the last thing it says is it will not include the sovereign functions of the government. And the example given is the atomic energy, currency, defense and space. That is it. That is all about the definition of enterprise, right? Next, we move on to goods. Oh, wait. Before moving on to goods, we have a question to discuss on enterprise. So we'll again pick up CA Final May 2006 question on the definition of enterprise, right? So it says, examine with reference to the relevant provision of the Competition Act 2002 whether government department supplying water for irrigation to the agriculturist after levying charge for water supplied and not a water tax can be considered as enterprise. So over here there is a department of government that is covered, right? But what are the functions that it is talking about? It is talking about supplying of water, but that is not a sovereign function because that is not free. They are charging for it, and we have seen that if they are charging, if it is a non-sovereign function, that is included in enterprise. The sovereign function that is free of cost, they will not be included in enterprise. So over here, since they are providing the service of delivering of water and they are charging for that, so it is a non-sovereign function of the government, and hence it will be included. And before writing this, you will have to write the entire definition of enterprise, right? So these are the kinds of questions you are put forward in the examination. You are put to face these kinds of questions. So there will be a specific topic that will be picked up. So analyzing the definition by breaking it up is more important rather than mugging up the entire definition, because even if you mug up the definition, you will not be able to interpret and write it down in the examination. And if there is any words that go haywire in the definition, the entire meaning changes. So you have to learn the meaning. Even if you are not able to write word to word in the examination, don't quote it. If you remember the word, you can put it into quotes. Otherwise, just simply write it down in text. This is this, this is this. Enough. Good to go, right? And if you remember word by word the entire definition, then write it. That is the best thing. Okay. Now we move on to the next definition, that is goods. So this is not a very heavy definition, right? So first I'll read out the definition and then we'll discuss the definition of goods. So goods means goods as defined in the Sale of Goods Act 1930 and includes product manufactured, processed or mined, debenture, stock, shares after allotment in relation to goods supplied, distributed or controlled in India, goods imported in India. So when you read it in the first instance, everything doesn't seep in, but still you get a vague idea. Okay, we're talking about the products, we're talking about the securities also, and we're talking about other goods supplied also, right? So now we'll understand it. It will not take a lot of time. The first point you need to know, that you need to write down in the examination, is that the goods are defined in the Sale of Goods Act 1930, right? So the entire definition of Sale of Goods Act 1930 will be included, but we are not concerned with what is the definition in the Sale of Goods Act, right? But it says that apart from that, it would also include the products that are manufactured, processed or mined. So anything that you are manufacturing, it's a manufacturing entity. You have a factory, you are manufacturing certain items, right? So those will be included. If you are processing something does not need to be manufactured, but just a mere processing on it. Manufacturing involves a lot of processes, and processing is just a single process that we're talking about. So if there's something that can be converted by a single process, even that is included in the term goods. And if there is something else that has been mined, coal, diamond, gold, whatever it is, that will also be considered as good, right? And goods would also include the debentures, stocks and shares after allotment. So it would include all debentures. Debentures are basically, the debentures will appear only when they are allotted. Stocks, it is listed or it is supposed to be sold. Shares, it is not necessary that the shares will be allotted at every point of time. When you issue shares, you get the allotment money and the allotment is due, and then you allot shares, right? So until and unless they're allotted completely, they will not be considered as goods, because they're not, unless and until it's allotted, it will not be able to be traded, right? So it will not be considered to be good in the market in which you can trade, right? And then in relation to goods supplied, if you're supplying some goods or distributing or the goods that are controlled in India, in relation to just those goods, if you have imported some goods, then that will also be covered in the definition. So not all imported goods will be covered, only those goods that are used or that are in relation to the goods supplied, distributed or controlled in India. It is simple as that, right? We would go through a question and then the entire thing will be clear to you. So for that we would refer to a question again from 2006, but November 2006, right? It says ABC Limited made an initial public offer of certain number of equity shares. Examine whether these shares can be considered as goods under the Competition Act 2002 before allotment, right? So they have specified that it is before allotment, and what we have seen in the definition, that shares after allotment will only be considered good, because only then it can be traded, right? So over here in the question we see that it is the initial public offer. The company has just started to deal in their shares and stock in the market, right? It is the IPO that has been issued. It is a big thing, it's a big company issuing IPO, but it is the IPO for initial public offer. The people don't have the share in hand. They're given the offer, they'll get the offer money, they'll get the allotment money, and then they'll start allotting the share. It is a long procedure. It will discuss the procedure in detail when we are doing the SEBI chapter. Over here you just need to understand is that the goods are not yet allotted, and then it at the end it also says, it specifies that it is before allotment. So we'll write down the definition and we'll say that thus shares after allotment are goods, but shares before allotment are not goods. And in the case of the question, we have the shares are not being allotted yet, hence they will not be considered to be goods. As simple as that. Understand? So this is simple as that. So these were the 5 definitions that you have to understand. You have to see each and every point, because you can be asked a question on any of them, right? And so far only these are the only 5 definitions on which you have been asked questions, either in your RTP or in your examination or in your practice manual or any other way, right? So next is the definition of person. So person would include an individual, a Hindu undivided family HUF, a company, a firm, an association of person or a body of individual, whether incorporated or not in India or outside India, right? So far those were the things we have already seen, and we have also seen every artificial judicial person not falling within any of the preceding subclasses. But over here you have certain other aspects also. You include any corporation which is established by or under the central, state or the provincial act. So any corporation, right? Or any government company as defined in section 617 of the Companies Act 1956. So the definition is still the old definition, that is referring to the Companies Act 1956. You have the new Companies Act 2013, but in the Competition Act 2002 it has not been amended. So you will still write about the Companies Act 1956 section 617, right? Then any body corporate incorporated or incorporated by or under any law of the country outside India, a cooperative society registered under any law relating to cooperative society, a local authority. So there is nothing much to explain in this definition, you just have to remember these things, right? Most of them you will remember because you have studied it in tax already. There are 2-3 extras that you will need to remember over here, right? Then the next definition that you have are 3 definitions: the relevant market, relevant geographical market and relevant product market. So what are they? So we'll have to look at these 3 definitions together in order to be able to understand each of them. So first we'll start with the relevant product market. So basically when we are talking about the relevant product market, we are talking about the market of a specific product, right? That means we are talking about a market which actually comprises of all those products or services which are regarded as interchangeable, right? Or they are substitutable by the consumer. right? And how are they substitutable? Either because of their characteristics or their price or their intended use, right? That means if there is any particular product, then we would consider its relevant product market to be that market in which all its substitutes or the products that can be interchangeably used are present. So that will be its market. We are not comparing it with the other products which is not related to it. So we are only talking about those products which are interchangeable, which are substitutable. So that will be the relevant product market, the market for that particular product, right? Because that is where we'll be able to compare it. Now, why do we actually define relevant product market, relevant geographical market and stuff? The basic purpose behind it is whenever you are trying to analyze whether any of the act of these players in the market is having an adverse effect on the market or not, how do you actually determine? There is a product, because of its act, because of any step that it has taken, right, there has been an impact. But how do you consider, how do you analyze the range of that impact, the velocity, the impact of that act, right? You will have to compare it. You will have to have a foundation for that within which you can compare the range, right? So that is why we subdivide the entire Indian market, the entire economy into small segments, and that segment would be the relevant product market for that product, or the relevant geographical market for something, or the relevant market. So we will always consider this impact, or we'll always do this comparison based on the relevant markets. Now when we talk about the relevant geographical market, right, then first I'll read out the definition, right, so that you get an insight to it. So the relevant geographical market means a market comprising the area in which the condition of the competition for supply of good or for provision of service, or demand of good or service, are distinctly homogeneous, and that can be distinguished from the conditions prevailing in the neighboring areas. So whenever you're talking about a geographical market of any product or any service, of any good or any service, right, that will be comprising of the entire area, right, that will have a homogeneous condition, homogeneous competition, right, homogeneous condition of supply, homogeneous condition of demand, right? So the entire area that has a homogeneous impact, right, that is relatable, that will be considered to be a geographical market. And the other important aspect is that it should be distinguished with the other neighboring areas, right? And then the relevant market means the market which may be determined by the commission, the competition commission, right? They will determine the relevant market on the basis of the relevant geographical market or the relevant product market. They will classify the market, and then they will see the impact, because when they have to see the impact, or when they have to analyze, right, then they will have to compare it, they will have to have a range, and then that will be the relevant market within which they will compare whether or not it is having an impact on that market, and what is the velocity of that impact, what is the magnitude of that impact, right? So in order to judge a magnitude of an impact, you will have to compare it with the relatable things only. So either you can compare it to the geographically related thing, the homogeneous situations, or the product relatable thing, the interchangeable product, right? So based on these two, the commission would decide a relevant market, and then you would see the magnitude comparing to that market. That is why we need to discuss, or we need to categorize the different markets, right? Then you have certain other definitions that are not covered in the slide over here, right, but you should be knowing, right? Like turnover, right? So what do you mean by turnover? So turnover is basically the value of sale of goods or services, right? So that is the definition. What do you mean by trade? So definition says trade means any trade, any business, industry, profession or occupation relating to the production, supply, distribution, storage or control of goods, and include the provision of service. That means the entire procedure beginning from the production to supply to distribution to storage and the control of good, all these are includable in the definition of trade. These are all a part of trade, right? Similarly, you have certain other definitions that I would recommend. Please go through and read it in your books, right? Like the statutory authority, the shares, services, practice, price, public financial institution. These are basic things right, that are not very specific to this Competition Act. That means these are not distinct in the Competition Act. It is a general term parlance in the general text, right? So that is not very important. That is not very distinct as per the Competition Act, and hence you may not be checked on those definitions from the point of view of the Competition Act. If they want to test you on the Competition Act, they would give you certain definitions that are different in the Competition Act than the general parlance. For example, agreement, right? You have generally heard that agreement is in writing and is enforceable by law, but in the context of the Competition Act, agreement may not be in writing and may not be enforceable by law. So these are the kind of things where the institute will try to test you, right? So with this, we are done with the definition part, and we'll be done with the lecture over here. In the next lecture, we'll be starting with the provisions of the sections. So if you go by the layman term and if you flip through the chapter, you will find a number of sections given in the chapter. You will have around 38 to 40 sections in this chapter, right, ranging from the 2, 7, 9, 10 series, 11 to 20 series, 51 to 56 series, 63, 64 series, and again 30 to 39 series, all these. So you have the series of sections, but let me tell you, the series of 50, series of 60, series of 30, these are not very important. Among the series of 30, only 36 is one important section. Otherwise, basically series of 2 to 20 is the most important section, on basis of which the institute generally tests you, and the reference to them are given in the practice manual also, right? So we'll be discussing the provisions of those sections in the next class.